Hello, everyone. This is the first in a series, hopefully, of Care to Share podcasts with friends and colleagues at Disability Cornwall. My name's Stephen Horscroft. Um, got a guest joining us in a minute. Got a lot to say about caring, actually. I'm a carer myself. It can certainly have an impact on personal well-being, and of course, caring the people we work for or work for to look after in our families. There's an impact on them from the type of care that we give. But there is support out there, and that support hopefully we can discover and talk about during the course of these podcasts. Um, for a lot of people, of course, caring can be paid. There's a lot of people who work in it professionally, and I hope to talk to some of them during the course of this podcast series. But also, generally speaking, it's unpaid work. There's millions of carers in the UK, quite a number in Cornwall as well. We'll explore some of the data as the podcast series goes on. And there's particular needs in terms of caring, particularly for Cornwall as well. An aging population, children and young adults with particular needs. And I hope to explore some of this as it goes on through the series. I have got some stats. I love stats. There's around 30,000 people in Cornwall who are providing over 20 hours of caring a week, and that's to around about 120,000 people. So that's quite a lot of people involved if you consider that the population of Cornwall now is approaching 600,000. Catherine Pinfield will be joining us in a minute. So I'll stop the recording now. And when Catherine joins, um, we'll start again with our very first interview. Let me welcome you, Catherine, to
Uh-huh.
what's the very first Care to Share podcast via Disability Cornwall. And this podcast really is about advice, information, and also stories amongst carers based in Cornwall. And we're going to see how the series goes. So it's great to have you as my very first guest, and thank you very
Uh-huh.
much for joining the podcast.
Yeah,
Um,
I can join you.
can you tell me about your role, or tell me a bit of background about you and your role as a carer?
So I've got a partner who's deaf. And I also, when I was brought up with my grandparents, and so my nan wasn't very well. She had leg ulcers and things, and so did a lot with my granddad as well. Um, and I've also worked for 6 months in ultrasound as well. Mhm.
Okay. So, in other words, your experience as a carer started quite young when you were a child.
Yes, yeah.
Did you find that that was particularly challenging as a child doing some of that, or were you still able to do everything that you wanted to do when you were a young person?
I was able to do what I could do, but purely because I had a grant that was paid to my grandparents on a fortnightly basis. And so when it came to school trips and stuff, things were budgeted for on a sort of monthly basis. So they would pay by installments rather than paying a lot of money all one go. Um, but I did get involved in community groups and things when I was younger.
Ah, fantastic.
Invited. I was invited to join the brownies on a Friday evening, so that was nice.
So, in other words, some of those early experiences perhaps
Mhm.
helped you choose what your career was going to be later on.
Um, a little, but not directly because I didn't do the 6 month contract that I had up until April of last year with the hospital until much later in life. But I did do a lot of signposting in one of the roles that I had as a contractor at the council.
Okay, you could have worked at the council at the same time as me, I think, quite possibly.
Mhm. I
Um,
see.
so what about caring for your partner? I mean, you mentioned that he's deaf. Um,
Yeah, so
what
he's
sort of
also he's also dyslexic, so I do a lot of correcting of spellings for him
okay.
and a lot of interpretation of what people are trying to say.
So is there quite a bit of administrative work involved? Because I don't know about you, I find that
Yeah.
there's an awful lot of letters from the council and the benefits, DWP and
Yeah, well,
HMRC and all the
he
rest of it.
he has his personal independence payment, which is separate from me, and he had that before I met him.
Right.
So he's okay, he's covered by that, but I believe it gets reviewed next year.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. We probably do. I mean, PIP is quite a
I
current
think
issue
it
actually.
seems to be reviewed on a 3 or 4 year basis,
Yeah.
and so that comes to an end next year. So he'll be up to being assessed for that.
But you guys don't have any concerns about the future of that?
Um, a change in government policy might change things, um, in that they're expecting people to work that might not be able to work. Um, and also at the moment, I've just become a student, so yeah.
Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the day-to-day experiences that you may have as a carer. I mean, we talked about paperwork and reading through official
Uh-huh.
correspondence, and also, as you've been alluding to, um, managing and
People,
developing your own life.
yeah. A lot of people don't like they don't actively listen to what somebody's trying to tell them.
Do you mean as a carer when you're trying to talk to agencies and organizations, you're finding they're not listening to you?
They listen to you, but in a patronizing way, so they're not actively listening to people.
That's interesting.
So
Why
yeah,
why
not
why do you
actively listening.
why do you think that is?
Because people these days are too fast, so a lot of people need to slow down, and obviously a lot of people obviously think they know it all
Yeah.
when in fact they don't, and they don't know the background of someone's situation either.
So there's a lot of pressure on those individual people to perform in their work, so they can't necessarily do their work properly. What do you enjoy about caring? What do you get out of it, Catherine?
It's helping others, making people feel better about themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that something like this podcast or a carers group or talking about issues, do you think that helps you and other carers? Or do you think that
I think a lot of people aren't recognised for what they do, especially in this county. People aren't recognised for what they do.
and how do you think that could be remedied?
Well, it was usually like back in the old days, it used to be they used to have activity days and break days away for people. But of course, with the lack of funding these days, that's not happening. So you're basically self-funding yourself. I
There
mean,
are,
we are going away on 2 occasions, but we're self-funding both
yeah,
occasions,
yeah.
and
Well,
they're
that's
not
good.
they're not cheap things,
No.
but then nothing is these days. So, but yeah, you used to get like I don't know, like it's more like a retreat thing, but it used to be paid for, but they don't have the funding for it anymore. And also, not myself, but people that are older than myself, with caring companies that come in for older people, they've only got 15 minutes to do it.
Yeah.
So basically got enough time to put a cup of tea on or a microwave meal for somebody, and then they've got to go. They don't have time for anything else.
There is I think I've got this right. There is a carers grant available of up to £400 through
Mhm.
adult social care. I
Mm.
think now I should know this. I mean, I certainly don't work for Disability
No,
Cornwall full time, but it used to be CRCC that administered it. And
yeah,
so that is available. You can get a carer's assessment, and then that money can be spent in whichever way you choose. I think it's meant to be a little reward for carers.
yeah.
Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I am aware of that, but because I'm not officially on as a carer on the package, it doesn't really apply to me,
Okay. Okay. So
if you see
you
what I
right.
mean.
Yeah, I do. I understand. I
Yeah.
understand. Um,
I've also actually I've also got a friend who's partially sighted. I don't see her very often, but I did take her to the theatre the other evening. And that was basically a thank you to her for letting me stay with her for a considerable part of time um, prior to meeting my partner.
oh, that's
So
lovely.
so that
That's
was a
nice.
nice evening, but
Yeah.
that was more of a personal thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you get any support, any other support from family and friends?
Uh, no, not really.
No, no. I guess,
I only see my family at Christmas,
yeah,
and that's only because they've got money to give me, and that's the only time I really see them.
yeah.
They're
There's
and
probably a
they're
whole
like,
program to be done actually, if I can find the right people on families and caring, because my experience is that extended families don't always understand. And that if you've got um, disability in the family, it's amazing actually how many people don't understand disability or care or the impact
mm,
that it can have um,
yeah,
when they've had no experience of it themselves. And that's not blaming them really. It's just kind of a fact of life. But you can, as a result of that, say things to people which could be construed as offensive. So yeah, that's uh, that's certainly an issue. Um, what do you think? What do you think's ahead in terms of your caring role?
I think it will stay as it is, really. Yeah,
I was going to ask actually as well, just taking a couple of steps back, um, because we've talked about PIP and carers allowance. In an ideal world, what extra support or what support do you think carers and indeed disabled people need? I mean, there's two things I can think of. One is the carer's allowance and issues around that, and the other potentially, which would negate the need for that, could be a universal basic income for everybody.
yeah, I guess so. You have to put up taxes again, though. So, and as always, rich people will get rich people, and poor people will get poor people.
But
Um,
what about the carer's allowance specifically? Do you think that um
well, it needs to go up in line with
yeah,
inflation rates.
yeah.
I know it obviously goes up in April each year, but a lot of things are out of reach of people, and also accessibility for people. Not in my situation, but those in wheelchairs, they can't get into a lot of cafes or toilets because of accessibility problems.
Yeah, on
And,
the
and
carers.
buses. buses are a problem.
Yeah,
Trains are a problem if you're in a wheelchair. You've obviously got to pre-book to get the ramps out.
yeah.
Um, Nobody's. I had an aunt who lived in Truro and went all the way to York in her 80s. And of course, when you get off there, there's nobody to tell you which platform to go to get out of the place. There's nobody there to carry your bags, etc.
Have you ever had a situation, Catherine, actually, or the people that you're involved in caring for, where you've been somewhere, it could be a cafe, a theatre,
Yes,
and it's not
I've been into Weatherspoons in Truro, and my partner had to walk out because he can't hear me. So we
right.
had to come out of there because
Yeah,
it's too noisy for
yeah,
him, and he
yeah.
can't hear what I'm going to say.
That's a bit like that Boots advert at the moment, and other chemists are available where they talk about people not being able to hear properly because of all the background noise.
Yeah.
Um,
hmm
and I think it's fun. It's funny, really, because
Like
that's something
you
I
get.
experience.
It's the same when you go if you go to a networking event
Yeah,
because everyone, people will sit down and listen to a speaker or something at the front of a room, but as soon as that speaker's finished, they all sort of mill around having teas, coffees, or soft drinks or alcoholic drinks, and they're all talking all at the same time in twos or fours, and you can't hear a lot of what's being said.
yes, and I find as well. I mean, the issue must be a lot worse with someone who's got hearing issues. That
Uh-huh.
sometimes if you're trying to concentrate on something someone's saying, but you've got people around you saying things, your hearing tunes into what they're saying rather than
Yeah.
the conversation that you're having face to face.
Mhm.
Yeah. Can you tell us about a particularly memorable moment with the person that you care for, with your partner or anybody else, sort of a happy or positive moment? And it can be related to the nature
Yes,
of the care or the issue or anything else.
the first time I took my partner to both the Eden Project and Glendurgan Gardens, so he was able to video it and really enjoy those two visits.
Fantastic. So he enjoys visiting gardens then in Cornwall.
We have done on occasion. We were not regulars, but he did enjoy that. Yes.
Yeah, good place to do that. Um, Another sort of question when I was researching this, I just wondered whether how caregiving has changed your perspective on life and relationships, and it may not have done.
Well, it's to slow things down to be manageable. So slowing things down, doing it at the pace that's comfortable for both yourself and the person you're caring for.
So having to adapt your own individual approach to the needs of that person, really.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to talk about stress a little bit as well as a carer. Is that something that you ever have to contend with?
Not particularly because I practice mindfulness. So
Ah, right,
yeah,
okay.
but it can be stressful at times if you've got a very limited amount of time and able to get something done as well as something that you're trying to do at the same time.
Yeah. Can you just tell us a little bit about mindfulness? Because it's something I don't know a great deal about.
So sitting down in a quiet space, listening to sounds in the local environment. So whether it's outside, listening to nature, or just removing yourself from the situation that you're in, if it's in a busy environment, taking time to notice what's around you. So taking time to notice individual blades of grass, flowers that are coming out, just coming out, etc.
Oh, that's really cool, actually.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like going back to when we were small children and
Yeah.
recognizing nature that's around us, which I think sometimes when you're very busy, especially when you've got that extra pull on your time of care that many people forget about. I know it's something. I mean, it's interesting how you describe it because it's something I certainly do now, and I've reflected that in my 50s, it's probably the first time I've done that since I was about 4 or 5 years old. So it is quite an interesting and useful tool. Um, do you ever sort of look for any other support for yourself as an individual?
Uh, or you can talk to people, but they won't always listen, or they won't always take the point of view, because usually people are in relationships and so they're getting support from a partner.
Yeah.
Um, and if they're single, they might meet up for a cup of tea or something. But after that, it's usually just a one-off, and you won't see them again.
Yeah, I understand, I suppose, because their relationships are pull on their time, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, isn't it? I mean, we always talk about money in terms of caring and disability issues, but time is against us all, really.
Uh-huh.
Um, what practical advice would you give to someone who's just starting out as a carer?
Just take time for themselves, as well as doing it, whether it's a paid job or unpaid job. Take time for yourself away from the caring role. So even if it's just to go and read a book or something, do that in your own time.
Yeah, so making time for yourself really
Uh-huh.
is important. Um, do you think there are any sort of I don't know, legal or practical or financial issues, anything at all about being a carer that people should be aware of that they might not be aware of? And that could be preparing somebody to be a carer, or it could be, as we've discussed, the
Well,
outside
they can
world.
they can get financial help. There are groups that they can meet up in, but of course they tend to be for those with disabilities rather than mixed groups. And they can also get, um, if the person's registered as disabled, they can get discounted travel on trains with the disabled person's rail card.
Ah, right. That
But it has to
that's
be
that's
registered
not
as disabled
yeah,
for that.
that's national rail travel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what about being a carer? I mean, you mentioned that you've been in work. Have you found any issues sort of balancing care and being in work?
Um, Not particularly myself, but I imagine people would be, but people can't get a lot of time off these days.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
and if you do take too much time off, then you get sacked. So,
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't
but
it?
quite interestingly, where I worked before, it was only a 6-month contract, but they had young people coming up to do an apprenticeship, and they kept them on afterwards. But they would turn up late on a couple of occasions or phone in sick on a couple of occasions, and they kept them on, whereas the likes of me they got rid of, which
Yeah,
doesn't seem fair. And if I was to turn up late, I would get told off.
yeah. I mean, you're alluding to a good point because
And I came from even further away than they did to the location of the employment, which was totally unfair.
yeah, they alluded earlier in the week there's a report out that says that the average age by which your job application is not likely to be noticed and just pushed to one side is 57.
Uh-huh.
And yet, we've got a tremendous number of people over 50 who want
Yeah.
to work and remain in the labour market, but
Uh-huh.
can't because
Yeah.
ageism may be the last great ism that's
Well,
unchallenged.
it's a protected characteristic, but it's not,
Yeah,
legally. Um, some jobs that you apply for, local government and things, you have to fill in all the equal opportunities form, but they don't actually have that when they're looking at your application.
yeah.
So they don't know how old you're going to be when you walk through the door at that interview.
Although they can guess, can't they? Because if you've put that you graduated in 1980,
Ah, yes, but a lot of the advice now is that you don't put on anything more than 10 years of the last employment.
right?
So you shouldn't put anything previous to 10 years ago of your employment. It doesn't
Yeah,
count for anything.
yeah,
But
Uh,
certificates and things do.
yeah, yeah. I was going to say, just coming back to the meat of what we're talking about as well, that you're more likely as you get older to have care responsibilities, um, be it children, which is the obvious one, or
Oh
disability
yes,
that
but
comes with
you can
age,
have
or
as much
older
time.
parents.
You can have as much time off as you need for children,
Yeah,
either maternity, paternity, or if the child's sick, you can have time off for that. Whereas if you're caring for somebody, you can't have time off for that. You're expected to be you're expected to be their full-time carer, and therefore you wouldn't be in work in any case.
yeah. It's the inequity of the situation, I think, that you're alluding
Mhm.
to, and I'm wondering whether, and I've not heard it said, whether the government's new employment legislation that's been talked about a lot recently touches on these issues, because
Mm.
it certainly, I think, gives people the right to work from home. I mean, I had a situation recently, well, when I say recently, a few years ago, a former colleague who could do a lot of their job from home, but their elderly parents lived um, in a different part of the British Isles, let's say that.
Mm.
But because they weren't presenting themselves, they were told that they needed to present themselves in order to, in the office, in order to maintain their employment. Um, so I think that need for flexibility for employers is one of the ways that this whole issue of skills and talent shortages um, needs to be addressed, actually. Um, yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion. I mean, it leads really to my next question, which is what societal changes would you like to see in terms of care in the future?
But it needs to be more recognised. Um, as we discussed before, it just needs more recognition.
Yeah, in terms of the things we've been talking about, like legislation and support, and
Mm.
possibly just greater societal awareness, really. What do you think? Do you think there's a future role for technology in terms of caring, which could take?
Yes, that's already happening. So
Yeah,
he partly uses tech speak, and so a lot of the time I have to wait for him to disconnect his hearing aid from his mobile phone because he can't hear what I'm saying. And he can also get it to write out for him. So if he says a sentence, it can put it in, but unfortunately, it will have spelling errors in it.
yeah. So that's
Um,
that's a bit like if you
yeah, and
dictate something onto a computer.
technology is already being used. I mean, the use of AI, for example, is already being used in a lot of situations.
Mm. Do you,
And you can get things now where you can like get the lights to turn on. You say turn on lights, and they'll come on. Turn off lights, they'll go off. Same with heating. and things like that. And you can have apps now to set your heating to come on if you're going to be late home. You can set your heating to come on at a certain time, at a certain temperature, so that when you get back to the house, it's all nice and warm if you want it warm.
Do you think that will specifically help carers in the future, perhaps reducing their workload or changing their workload, the nature of it
It's already done away with a lot of employment, unfortunately,
in care
in general.
in
Not
general?
only just, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I wondered whether one of the ways couldn't be, and I remember it being discussed many years ago that making career care an attractive career is, of course, quite hard because for professional carers, um, it's a very sort of personal and low paid and hard work kind of job. But
Mhm.
if there was the ability to use more technology and for them to learn some skills, some basic sort of nursing and medical skills alongside it, it might be a way to help develop their career pathways. Don't know what you think.
It's already being done by providing university degrees and such.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
a lot of people that will do it locally will do it, but then they won't actually work in the local area.
Yeah.
And you've got the affordability problem in Cornwall.
Yeah.
So even if you've got 4 graduates, they can't afford to rent, so they're not in this county, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we're one big retirement home, so
Although professional carers tend not to be graduates, I was just wondering whether it wouldn't be another route for them to be able to develop their career without
a lot of
wanting to
the
do a degree.
firms are privatized anyway,
Yes, absolutely.
and a lot of the management of those firms are remotely managed, and the managers don't participate in it themselves,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because
unfortunately.
if you look at if you look up some of the care agencies and trace back who runs them and just look at the number of directorships they've got,
Mm,
it makes quite an interesting read, actually.
yeah. Mhm.
I mean, do you think there's a role for a national care service attached to the NHS?
Possibly, but it would be privatized and they wouldn't get the pay that they'd be entitled to. So pays a thing. So although people in the NHS have recently had a pay rise, it's not really enough, I don't think.
Yeah. What, the junior doctors, you mean?
No, just anybody.
Just anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's not enough.
Yeah.
So basically, you're working to live, basically, and
Yeah.
you can actually get more money now by not working than working, although they want to change that
Final
because
question.
by the
Oh,
time you've forked out for transport and running your car, that chews up a great deal of your wage if you're working.
that's true. Yeah. I know, professional carers obviously have to have their own transport, and I always,
But they're being paid for that a lot of the time, so they
yeah.
get mileage paid and things.
Well, I was just going to say, I always alight
So
on
it's a
this
good
issue.
way of getting a new car.
Well, I always alight on this issue in Cornwall of what I call enforced car ownership. That
Hmm.
we've got, apparently we've got the greatest number, and this has been for a long while, of cars over the age of 10 years old,
Hmm.
with public transport as it is as well, and it's
Yes.
not full coverage and it's not round the clock. People are forced to own cars which they can't necessarily afford.
Hmm.
So and that could be the case whether you're a professional carer or a family carer, although thank goodness there's the Motability scheme, which I'm sure will could be something that we could talk about in a future podcast. um One last question. I'm not sure whether it applies to you, Catherine. When you're not around, Do you worry about your partner when you're not at home, or do you feel that, he can
I'm
look
quite
after himself?
fortunate that he has his own hobbies,
Yeah,
and he has hobbies that we can do together, so it's not too much of a worry.
yeah,
Um,
fantastic.
the most recent worry is he's been ill. He's had this nasty bug that's been going around, but he's got a heart condition as well, so that's been a bit of a worry. But he's just coming out of that now, unfortunately.
Good, good. Do you find that the NHS is responsive and supportive of your needs as a couple?
At times and at times not.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Listen,
Uh-huh,
Catherine, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I
uh-huh.
think that's been a really interesting um, conversation. I'm sorry I might have interrupted you a little bit, because I can't see you. I can't read the emotional intelligence, as it were. But thank you very much for being my very first guest on Care to Share.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
Look after yourself, and all the best to your
Okay.
husband as well.
Oh,
Bye
it's my
bye.
partner. Yeah.
Partner,
Thank
yes.
you. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.